Welcome back to the OTB recap series. We picked things up just about 2 weeks later after my kind of disastrous miss in the club tournament. I'm now playing in another sort of club tournament. This one is a monthly tournament that is hosted by the International Chess Academy, which is sort of a chess school in northern New Jersey. And I'd played in this tournament in, I think, two previous editions. Both times I scored 2 out of 3. Usually there's like a few masters who'll play, so it's often the case where I'll play a couple of low-rated players. I'll get to play one high-rated player, so if I lose that game, I'll finish with 2 out of 3. In this tournament, there were again a few masters. First game I played a 1900. I won fairly convincingly. Now we're in the second game where I'm playing this kid who I had actually faced in an important round of my club championship back in April, and I had actually lost that game. So I'm looking to get some revenge here. This kid is maybe like 12 years old, rated around 2000. When we're going to pick things up a little bit into the middle game. So I got a fairly comfortable position. He didn't play very ambitiously. He played, A3, H3. He's just kind of waiting to see what happens. And I go A5 here, and I'm looking to expand on the queen side, threatening B4. To attack the knight, after which the 4 pawn is going to be vulnerable. So he realizes already that he has to act. So he goes bishop b3. And when I go b4, I should mention that I didn't take the pawn here because I felt like he gets some compensation if he just moves the bishop. Like, I have to move the knight back, and then the pawn on e5 is kind of vulnerable. Like, he can go rook e1. So I decided not to take, just go b4. And essentially what I'm forcing him to do is trade off his bishop, because if he moves the knight back, then I will just take the pawn for free. So he trades off his dark square bishop, which makes me happy because now I just have an unopposed bishop there. He goes knight a4. I have to either backtrack or I can take on a3. It was an interesting moment. So what I had calculated was that if I take, he can take here, but then I'm able to just pick up this pawn. I should just be up a clean pawn. But I also saw that he can take like this, and then if I take here, he has knight b6. And again, maybe he has a bit of compensation. I wasn't quite sure. I decided just to preserve my bishop. I felt like it would be, good on this diagonal. He goes bishop c4. And this was probably the most critical moment of the game because once again, I can take on a3. I can try to do something else. Like, I also had a plan of going knight h5 and trying to bring the knight to either f4 or even g3 because I have this pin on this diagonal. But I thought that he can just play queen d2, and I'm not really accomplishing much because if he's able to trade off the queens, then the c6 pawn is weak. Seems like I'm allowing him too much. The really interesting thing was what would happen if I had taken this pawn here, because what I saw was that if I take on a3, looks nice because I win a pawn. I'm now hitting his knight. But then I saw he can perhaps take on e5 here. And if I pick up the knight, he has knight takes f7. And here it was entirely unclear to me what is happening. Because if I take the knight, I'm actually getting back rank mated. Because now the rook would be pinned. So he has this check and then this is mate. If I don't take, though, he's threatening all kinds of discover checks. So I really didn't want to go into this. Turns out, though, what I needed to see, and this is a very hard move to see from a distance, that's the move bishop a6, basically deflecting his bishop. And then I can actually, and here I'd actually have to take with the rook and allow him to pin me again. Because if I take with the king, then my king being chased down to the open, Engine says this is very dangerous because he has e5 ideas, he has like rook a1 attacking the queen, and then potentially rook b1 infiltrating. So I would have had to take with the rook, and then we get some position like this where I have a knight and a bishop for a rook. He has an extra pawn, but it should be enough for me to be well in the game and possibly better. That was just some crazy stuff to calculate. I also missed that in this position I can play queen g3. Cool move, which I didn't see at the time. Point is that if he takes here, I can take on h3. And I have an attack. He obviously has to stop mate. And Again, kind of some complicated variations, but here I should be doing all right. But anyway, I decided to play bishop e6 here. Just try to trade off his bishop, just play very practical. I should mention the time control was 60 minutes with a 5-second delay, so a decent chunk of time, but by this point I was already down to about 30 minutes or even a little less. And in this position, he took on e5, which I had seen as a possibility, but things are about to get wild because I take on c4, he takes, and I do win a pawn back, but now my knight is kind of in a pin. The queen's on the e-file, and here he goes knight to b6, attacking the rook. I move the rook. He trades, and here he thought for quite a while. I was up like 10 minutes on the clock, and he takes on a5. And I was like, all right, I'm going to take the knight, but then he takes on c6, and suddenly my queen and rook are forked, and my queen is also busy defending the knight. It turns out a move which I needed to throw in was actually rook to d2. The point is that after he moves the queen, which he has to, right, because it's under attack, I can take on c2. And then there's, again, some very complicated stuff. It eventually kind of fizzles out to draw after this move. He wins the knight back, and he might even be slightly better here because he has the extra pawn, but I have something in return, like the powerful pressure in the diagonal. But instead, I take the knight, he takes here, and basically, I am losing now my rook in exchange for 2 minor pieces, but also he has more pawns, and he took on b4, just going 3 pawns up, basically. What he actually missed, though, is if he had just thrown in the move g3, I would have practically just been lost here, because my queen has to defend the knight, I have to go back, and then he would have to move rook e1. And the only way to defend the knight is to play f5, but then he has check. If I play king f8, he can even just take on b4. And once the queens get traded and he has all these extra pawns, this should be winning for him. But he was down low on the clock, he decided just to take, but this allows me to actually create some counterplay, because I go bishop b6, I'm now pinning the pawn, I have a lot of pressure against f2. He goes c4, trying to block out the bishop. But I, before he gets a chance to do that, throw in bishop d4. And now he's not able to shut me down. So he goes c5, right? He needs to push the pawn. And I go h5. I need to make some space for my king, right? I can't go knight g3 here because he just has back rank mate. So I go h5. And he pushes to c6. I bring the bishop back to stop the pawn. Like, he has all these pass pawns, but as long as my bishop stays put, he cannot push them. And here he played queen c2. He was down to like maybe a minute or two. I had 11 minutes, but I spent a lot of them on this next move because I knew that my pressure is only going to last so long. Eventually, if I don't do anything, he will get a pawn through. So I have to do something here. And I ended up finding a clutch move, and that is the move queen f4. The point is that I now guard the c7 square so he can't push. And I'm also just threatening to put my bishop on c7 and attack on this diagonal. Like, let's say that he had played just some move like b5. I will go h4, important move to control g3, and then go bishop c7. And if I can get my queen into h2, I'm going to have a very dangerous attack. And yeah, I really wasn't sure at the time, like, am I winning now because of this idea? Does he have something to draw? It turns out he did have enough to draw. He needed to play the move c7, just sacrificing his pawn, but luring my bishop off the diagonal so that he can now play g3, and this sort of allows him to stabilize, where he's not in as much danger of getting his king side destroyed, basically. He, though, unfortunately for him, being a young kid, not so good at the fast time controls, he basically just fell apart at this point, and he played g3, which is just a panic move attacking the queen, but he completely forgot that the pawn on f2 is pinned by the bishop, and I can just take. And I can take this as well, and then I can play knight g3. And here he has to resign, because I'm threatening queen h1 mate, and he has no way to stop it. Knight's invincible, queen on e4 just gets taken, and that's it. So kind of a tumultuous game there. I was actually like in control for the first portion of it, and then sort of lost my way. But fortunately for me, he kind of missed like a few moves there, and I was able to win this game and start 2 out of 2 going into the last round. So in the third and final round, I'm facing off against a very experienced player, an older master who is in his 60s, kind of at his floor in terms of USCF rating, but he obviously has a load of experience and very interesting player. Plays a lot of kind of offbeat stuff, but he played e5 against me. Like, because I had seen some of his other games, I was expecting something sort of more sharp, but he decided to go e5. And I had just kind of recently, within like the 6 months or so before this, started playing the Ruy Lopez. And he plays a6, which is the main move, knight f6, and the line which I started to play when I picked up the Ruy is this move queen e2, which is known as the Warmauled attack. It's a little bit offbeat, not the most ambitious move, but it has its interesting ideas. He goes bishop e7, which essentially after castles and b5, and he castles, it transposes in something known as the Warl attack, which is something white will even play sometimes like within the main line. And here I go c3, which is classic idea in the Ruy to prepare d4. However, I'd spent some time here because I realized that he could, if he wanted to, play d5 and go for sort of like a Marshall Gambit attack idea where like he gives up the e5 pawn, but then he can throw in knight f4, or he can take and try to go for like bishop d6, as they often do. So I was a little bit wary of that, but he decided just to play d6, just to play it kind of normal. I go h3, stopping bishop g4. He goes knight a5, which is a common idea. Here black will typically play c5, sort of clamping on the center a bit. White will play d4. This is sort of like common theory. Oftentimes black will reroute the knight. So that's what I was more or less expecting. And then this guy goes knight h5. And I was like, what? I mean, I recognized kind of the tactical idea behind it. The point is like, a lot of times when you put a knight on h5 and it's not protected, there's this tactic with a discovered attack, but here it doesn't work because he has knight f4, intermezzo, threatening my queen, and then he takes the knight and he basically wins a piece. So tactically this move works, but strategically it makes absolutely no sense because I'm just going to go d4 anyway, and I mean, what is your knight doing on h5? He goes knight f4, and I was like, wow, he really just did that. I mean, I'm going to take, obviously. And okay, he made me give up my bishop, but he also just basically gave up control over the center because his pawn is now on f4. He has doubled pawns. This pawn is a bit weak. And I just instinctively played e5 here, which may not have been the best move, or at least not to play it right away. But the point is that if he takes, I have this queen e4 double attack where I'm threatening the rook, but I'm also threatening mate. So he's going to be losing something. He plays d5, though, stopping queen e4. And I just go knight d2. He played knight c4 now. So I thought his idea is that if I take, he is then going to take back and open up the b file. And I thought that that was a little bit unnecessary for me to allow. What I didn't consider, though, is I can play b3 here and basically trade off that pawn. And now I just have a very healthy structure. He has a weak pawn on a6, so this would have been pretty good for me. But I decided just to play b3, and he goes knight a3. I was like, what is this guy doing? He is putting his knight on a3. How is his knight ever going to get back into the game? He goes bishop e6 here. I felt pretty comfortable in my position, but at this point, I wasn't sure how to actually make progress because it's not so easy to go after that 4 pawn. I mean, I could play like g3, but I don't want to trade for it because that kind of alleviates his weakness. Also, that hangs the pawn on h3, so that wouldn't work. That's why I played king h2 first, actually. Now, an idea which the engine suggested to me, which, I mean, the fact that I didn't consider this shows really where my head was at, is the move knight b1. Did not consider this at all because I thought his knight on a3 is so bad. Why would I want to trade for it? But the point is that after I get rid of it, I can actually try to open up the queen side. And if he takes, again, I'm going to take with the rook. He's going to have a weak pawn on a6, which I can target. If he goes b4, again, he's just dropping a pawn. If he plays c6, I can essentially just slowly start to build up on the queen side, maybe double up the rooks. Would have been like a pretty sound plan. But of course, I didn't consider that. I went king h2. He goes queen d7, and I go knight g1. My idea was basically to start to like push a bit on the king side, trade off the f4 pawn, and open up the f-file. The reason I couldn't play g3 here is, again, because he can take on h3. So I go knight g1, mildly questionable move, but because I just have such a nice center, my position was still better. He goes bishop f5, and here I played g4. Again, another sort of exclamation mark, question mark move, because he could have taken en passant and then traded here, and actually this b4 idea is something he probably didn't consider. He could have really destabilized my center here, brought in his queen. If he gets c5 in, then I could be in trouble. He, however, took the bishop on d3, deciding not to take en passant, and then he played f5 himself, which is now a bit of a questionable move on his end. I take en passant, he takes back, and now I bring the knight back into the game. He goes g6, I take the open e-file. He contests, but now I play knight e5. And at this point, there was really kind of a shift in sort of the dynamic of the game, because up to this point, I kind of knew I was better, but I wasn't really sure how to continue. He was creating some problems. But at this point, when I played this move, he still had 24 minutes. And I had maybe 20 or so. He spent 16 minutes on the next move, because he realized actually how bad his position was at this point. If he takes my knight, I can just take back with the pawn. I have a protected pass pawn now. And I can just bring my knights f3, double up the rooks, or just bring a rook to the d-file. I have a very comfortable position. If he moves his queen, which he eventually did, though, now I can just reinforce the knights. And I can begin with my next phase of the plan, which is simply to attack on the king side, because I recognize that because of this advanced f4 pawn, his king side is just weak, and I can potentially break through with some h4, h5 stuff. So eventually I just bring a rook into the game, just building up patiently, and now it's time, h4. And here he kind of panics and he takes the knight, which, giving up the main piece, which is protecting his king, cannot be a good idea. I take with the rook. He threatens the pawn on g4, so I go to protect it. And h5, I mean, I'm looking to break through. He's down to just minutes here. He goes rook e4 now, trying to block off my queen. And I actually can take on g6, but the problem is that he has this h6 move, where my rook is now under attack, and if I move it, the pawn on g4 hangs. So I didn't want to allow that. I decided to bring the other rook sort of into the game. He goes king g7. At this point, he's down to 30 seconds, and 5 seconds delay is not that much time. I go knight e5 now, activating the knight, attacking his queen, but then he played queen e7, and I was like, wait a minute. Now my rook is hanging. I did consider actually taking on g6, but then I saw that he takes my rook, and I take on h7. If he goes back, I can bring in the queen this way, and I should have like pretty much checkmate coming. But what if he goes to f6? I didn't really see a way to break through here. Turns out what I actually missed, something very simple. I missed that I have check. And after he takes my pawn, I take his rook and defend my own rook at the same time. Funny, it's kind of a similar thing to what I missed in that previous game, where I missed like some knight defense, like several moves down the line. So because I didn't see that, I went back with the knight. I was like, I don't want to take any chances. I'm obviously close to winning, so I need to just keep everything under control. He goes queen e6, and now I bring my rook to h4. where I'm finally defending the pawn on g4 so that if I take on g6 and he plays h6, I can move the rook away. That was my idea. He's, again, like hanging on by a thread. He's down to seconds. I go rook e5. He takes, but now I take with the pawn, which forces his rook back. And now I'm able to take on g6. And if he had taken with the pawn, I actually would have had this very filthy tactic, rook h7 check. Point is that if he takes the king, I can fork his queen and king. And if he goes back to g8, I can even play king h3 here. Defending the pawn, he still can't take my rook. And my rook is basically going to be a monster on the 7th rank. He took with the queen, though, and that hangs the d5 pawn. And now it's basically just a time scramble, because he's playing like literally on, I kid you not, I'm pretty sure he was playing moves with 1 second on the clock. Like he was making every move within the 5-second delay. And I had maybe a minute. I go e6. He is just like, there's not much he can do. He's trying to generate some kind of counterplay. He gives this check. I can just move the king up. He goes back, and now I find queen e4, which threatens to take on h7, but also I take the knight now when he defends. So I'm now officially up a piece. All I have to do is consolidate, defend the knight, and eventually I find this rook infiltration, move the queen out of the way of the pin, and I play knight f7. The point is that I'm threatening to bring in the queen to h8 with mate, so he basically has to part ways with his queen. And now I just, at this point, like, he was really trying to press me on the clock because I was down to like 30 seconds or something, or maybe 20. But up a queen for rook, it's very simple to convert. I just bring in the queen, push the pawn, and I have checkmate. And yeah, he cursed under his breath in Russian as I delivered mates, which sealed a nice tournament victory, 3 out of 3. Clear first. There were a couple of the people going into that round with 2, but they tied. So they finished with 2.5. I got 3. Gained a good 20 points in this tournament. I did, however, then lose a few points from that previous tournament, which concluded after this one, actually. So my rating at the end of September was 2136, close to a new high. Technically, I reached a high after this tournament, came down a little bit, but in pretty good shape, heading into my next big tournament, which took place in October, and I will be out with the recap for that one pretty soon. Stay tuned.